Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another ship fitting guide for EVE Echoes. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the Tech 9 Gallentean Federation battleship, the Megathron. Now I know a lot of folks were disappointed when NetEase announced that they were taking the Tech 9 Caldari battleship, the Rokh, and moving it up to Tech level 10. I know a lot of folk had been training into large railgun skills purely to fly the Rokhs, and now that that's out of reach, I wanted to take a look at the Megathron, which is also a large railgun battleship, and see if that made, a good alternative for anyone who'd been training into those large railgun skills. It's not quite the same ship, but I want to let you guys know what you can do with this, and maybe it's a ship you can use in the interim until we all hit Tech level 10 in, what, 6 months' time, or however far away it is. Feels like a long way off. Anyway, I do also apologise for the complete lack of content I've been able to put out onto the channel recently. It's been a very difficult couple of weeks for me here in Zimbabwe. My wife's been very ill, both my cats have been very ill, so I've been in and out of hospital, in and out of the vets. My little girl here, bless her, little kitty, is still washing herself next to the microphone at the moment and sneezing away, so I do apologise if you can hear any sneezes. Unfortunately, our little ginger boy did have a seizure on Tuesday morning and passed away. I've been running around trying to sort out vet bills and hospital fees and all that kind of thing. Very, very expensive. Struggling with that, so I've barely had a chance to log in and claim the rewards, let alone actually sit down and make some content. But hey, here's hoping that I'm back in the game now, can make some more content, and give you guys some cool ideas of what's coming in Tech, well, what has arrived for some of us in Tech level 9. Anyway, if you do enjoy this video, let me know by hitting like on it, sub to the channel for all things EVE Echoes, ding that notification bell to never miss an upload, and let me know in the comment section down below what ships and topics you want me to cover in future videos. If you do want to go the extra mile to help support this channel, you can do so by joining us on Patreon, or indeed by checking out the Redbubble merchandise store, all linked in the description. Now, beyond that as well, today is of course a giveaway day. So all I'm looking for today is for you to comment in the description down below, in the comment section down below, which Tech 9 ship you are looking forward to most. If you've already got it and you're already at Tech 9, awesome. If you're miles off Tech 9, just have a look at the tech tree and tell me which ship you are looking forward to most. I have 2 months of Combo Omega to give away to 2 lucky winners, month-long Combo Omega each. So good luck. Let me know in the comments section down below which Tech 9 ship you're looking forward to most, and on Monday I will let you all know who the lucky winners are. Anyway, that long intro out of the way, thank you for bearing with me. Let's jump right in to talking about the Gallentean Federation Megathron. You'll find the Megathron in the Gallentean Federation ship tree all the way across on the battleship line up at Tech level 9. Here it is here, let's have a little look at it. Very cool looking ship, one of the most iconic hulls in EVE, that sort of split hull design, big brute, big chins on the front there. This is definitely an absolutely brutal ship, just in its appearance alone. And of course it does look a little bit like the Serpentis Corporation Vindicator as well, which of course is based off the same blueprint. Now we've got a couple of cool skins here. We've had the titanium silver skin for a while, which just takes the ship and gives it a really badass sheen, very dark colours with those orange highlights. And from the Guardians Gala event, we have the rose thorn skin, which I really like. I like that sort of muted gold and that metallic purple. That is a very cool skin. If you don't like the standard Gallentean Federation grey and sea green, gives you some cool options. Anyway, let's actually have a look at the Megathron itself, at its attributes and fittings, and discuss what this actually means in the grand scheme of things. So looking first of all at its fitting profile, being a Tech 9 battleship, it has 2 drone tubes. These can launch small, medium or large drones, and of course being able to launch large drones means it also has the capability of using sentry drones. Unfortunately, at the moment at least, they are bugged in the game, and they only fire at things that are within your drone control range. That's all very well and good, yeah sure, 35km drone control range with a sentry gun that has an optimal range of 60km and an accuracy fall off of 35. Yeah, you kind of see the problem there, I'm sure. Anyway, so ultimately you've got those 2 drone tubes there. They are supplementary damage. You can use those to take out things like frigates and destroyers that get too close if you put some medium drones in there. Large drones are very useful if you're going to be up close and personal and brawling, and you can try and use the sentry drones once they're fixed if you want to go for a sniper fit. The main damage output from the Megathron, of course, comes from the 7 high slots. 7 high slots that are going to have large railguns in them, either snub-nosed or rifled, as we'll discuss later. 3 mid-slots gives us a decent amount of electronic warfare, tackling, things like capacitor warfare, different options there that we can use. 3 slots is, I think, sufficient for a ship like this. It's not so much that you kind of make it into an E-warship, but it gives you a lot of versatility in your builds. 6 low slots as well is monstrous. That means you can fit a good amount of tank, plus you can fit in things like weapon upgrade modules, propulsion systems, all kinds of stuff there in those low slots. A lot of versatility again, which again is matched with the 3 combat rigs and 3 engineering rigs. Now, the cargo hold of the Megathron is sizable. 1,350 cubic meters means you can carry a fair amount of stuff in there, which in fairness you kind of need to, considering how much space battleship parts take up. Defensively speaking, 63,731 is actually on the middling sort of side of defences of battleships. There are some that are much tankier, but it's fairly tanky in and of itself. This is, of course, being a Gallente ship, mainly on its structure, 18,733, but it's got a solid armour of 18,366, and okay, the shields are feeble by comparison, but they're still sizable at 15,227. Decent resistance spread across the board there, nothing out of ordinary, nothing really worth mentioning. The capacitor bank, however, is where things do come apart a little bit here on the Megathron. The 10,157 at first glance seems absolutely massive, but as far as battleships go, that is actually on the lower end of the scale, and it does cause the Megathron some problems, as we'll see later on, but spoiler alert for the rest of the video. Just be aware that the capacitor bank here is not quite as powerful as perhaps you might like it to be, with a fairly low maximum capacitor recharge rate of 28.44 gigajoules per second. Maximum lock targets of 8 is standard fare for a battleship. It's a big ship, it needs to be able to lock onto a lot of different things. It's got a low scan resolution though, 114 meters means it is going to take quite a long time to lock onto anything, especially the smaller ships like the frigates and destroyers are going to take upwards of 10 seconds to lock onto, and that's time that you could be spent firing at them. Signature radius as well is humongous, 354.3 meters. This isn't the broadside of the barn, it is the barn. In fact, I would argue it's probably the entire farm. You don't miss a Megathron when you're shooting at it. If you're in range of a Megathron, chances are you're hitting it, just because of how humongous that signature radius is. Flight velocity of 121 meters per second is sort of fairly slow. Obviously, it's a battleship, they're not the fastest moving things, anyway, but as far as battleships go, that is on the middling to slow end of things. 2.0 astronomical units per second warp speed, very high mass, but with a very low inertia modifier, makes this actually a little bit more nimble than you might expect it to be. It's still a battleship, it's still slow and ponderous in regards to any other ship type out there, but as far as other battleships go, the Megathron's actually surprisingly agile. If we look at its trait description here for the skills, as a Tech 9 battleship, of course, it has Battleship Command, a bonus of a 5% reduction to inertia modifier per level. 25% reduced inertia modifier means that that already nimble ship becomes even more so. That's a skill well worth training into, especially, well, I was about to say especially if you're going for a brawler build, but in fairness, it's actually really useful for a kiting build as well, because it means you hit your maximum velocity as you go to move into distance much faster too. You accelerate and decelerate faster. Now, of course, I mentioned the Megathron is the other battleship that uses large railguns. A lot of people were hoping to use the Rokh, which is now Tech 10. The Megathron still uses those large railgun operation skills. It's a 5% reduction to large railgun activation time, and a 5% increase to large railgun tracking speed. Now, the large railgun activation time, to me, that works nicely on both the rifled and the snub-nosed. I find that actually these, because the snub-nosed obviously have a shorter activation time anyway, you're getting a bigger in seconds reduction if you're putting that onto rifled railguns, but then the large railgun tracking speed is much more beneficial to the snub-nosed railguns. So the Megathron kind of gets that little bit of versatility in its trait description. Or does it? Let's actually have a look at fitting this thing, and we'll talk about different ways you can fit this, and why I think that there is definitely one way better than another. Now, if we're to compare the Megathron to the Rokh, I know a lot of people were looking forward to the Rokh in order to fit large rifled railguns and do a kind of sniping build on it. So I'm going to emulate this first of all on the Megathron and see how it fares with such a build. Now obviously for this to work we're looking at large rifled railguns in our high slots. Here I've gone for core C types because I can, and because if you're going to be using a ship this big and expensive, go full hog. Obviously if all you have are things like the storyline versions or even just like the Mark 7 or Mark 9s, they'll do the job, just not obviously quite as efficiently, but that's fine. The idea here is to start off with whatever loot you have and then work your way up to the dead space. Anyway, we're looking at an optimal range here, thanks to the fittings that I'm using, of 60.1 kilometers, with an accuracy fall-off of 35.39 kilometers. That means we are 100% effective up to that 60 kilometer range, dropping to 50% effective by the time we reach 95 kilometers, and then at 120 is where we're hitting 0. So you need to be within 120 kilometers, but anywhere between 120 and 60 you're going to be doing damage. 60 to 90 is obviously where we want to mainly be. Now you can see very low tracking speed, and we've got a fairly fairly low activation time of 4.09 seconds. That's partially thanks to the ship's skills. Now, in order to make this sort of long-range build work, of course I've gone into the low slots here with 3 Eagle tracking computers, and yes, you do get a bit of a fall off on using these, and there is a penalty for using more than these, and a lot of people will tell you to stop at 2. I've gone for 3 just because getting it up to 60 is a nice round number rather than 55 for the optimal range, but there we go. Now that's obviously, these are weapon upgrade modules for turrets. What they do is they increase the optimal range, the accuracy fall off, and the tracking speed of any fitted turrets when these are cold, and you can activate them for a massive boost to those bonuses there at the bottom, giving it a humongous extra range and faster tracking on the turrets, which will come in useful, as we'll see later. Now, the other part of obviously doing a sniping build is that we need to be able to control our range, and in order to do so, a large micro warp drive just seems to make sense here. It's a 564% increase to the flight velocity, gives us an actual movement speed to get from A to B, and we don't really care that the signature radius of 413 you know, is obviously going to be chewing, making us a much bigger target. We're already a humongous target. Nothing is going to suddenly go, oh, I was missing you before, but now I can hit you as soon as you put a micro warp drive on. The only downside is, as I said, that the Megathron does have a fairly low capacitor anyway, and the fact that this is chewing 25% off the top of that capacitor is fairly problematic. We then have a magnetic field stabilizer. Again, weapon upgrade module, adds extra damage to the railguns and makes them cycle faster. You can activate it for bigger boosts. And then a large shield booster here just to help us maintain our shields. Now, you can go for an armor repairer here. Again, refer to my video on why shield tanking is just flat out better than armor tanking. Yes, I know I've talked about here that the capacitor is a problem, and yes, armor tanking does use less capacitor. This is one of those ships where the armor tank kind of, it's more capacitor stable, but it doesn't matter that it's capacitor stable, because stable capacitor but not able to repair your armor fast enough, it doesn't matter. You can sit there going, oh well, my capacitor's stable, as you're, you know, flying away in your pod once your ship's been destroyed, because the armor repairers were not able to keep up with the damage. For the mid-slots then, a typical tackle build here, Warp Scrambler with Stasis Weber Fire, slows down anything that's moving, switches off micro warp drives, and drops movement speed. And for anything at range, I've gone for a Target Painter, make their signature radius bigger so I can blap them from range. Now, in regards to the drones, I've obviously gone for a couple of Mark 9 Ogres, but I think you'll find here in the hold as well, I am also carrying, I'm hoping here, yep, some Mark 9 Hammerheads, and I would put some Sentry drones in there as well. Obviously, the Sentry drones are going to be better for this sniping build, but as I mentioned, they are bugged. Pointless having a drone that has a range of 100 kilometers when it can only shoot at something within 35. You may as well just use the ogres or the hammerheads there to do their damage. For the rigs, in the combat rigs, I've gone for 2 burst aerators and a collision accelerator, extra DPS, that's your best way of getting hard DPS, along with 2 targeting system subcontrollers and a semiconductor memory cell. This helps me lock on a little bit faster and helps maintain the capacitor. Unfortunately, 2 semiconductor memory cells or a semiconductor memory cell and a CCC doesn't really help. The capacitor here is always going to be an issue. We just need to keep range and blap things. Now, I'm going to showcase why this build definitely works, but I'm going to talk about why I don't think it's a great build as we look at this in demonstration. This is Bad Hair Day Part 2, Wave 2. I'm coming to the end of it now, and you can already see we are having some capacitor issues, just by using some weapon upgrade modules and things, plus having to run my shield booster earlier on, has left me down at sort of the 30 to 31% capacitor, which, frankly put, is not a great situation to be in, especially since I'm not at 100% shields either, and the next wave is about to spawn. Now, as the next wave spawns, we're going to obviously start locking onto those small targets. So I'm going to go down my ship list here and look for anything that is a frigate or a destroyer, of course getting those Condor interceptors and the Cormorant covert ops first. And we need to really be opening fire on these quickly, because you can see they are closing the gap very swiftly to us, and we need to be firing at those targets and taking them out whilst they're approaching and have that low angular velocity. The trouble is, obviously, with the Megathron not having any bonuses to range, we do still have to be fairly close to get those railguns working. And ideally, I would have liked to have pulled away to a little bit further range, but I just don't have the capacitor to do so at that point in time. As you can see there, I am going to turn my engines on and try and get a bit more range now. One of these Condor 2 interceptors has made it into range. The point I want to kind of drill in here, though, is that this fit made it through Wave 1 and Wave 2 with about 80% shield remaining, but at 30% capacitor. We are running out of capacitor, we're just about holding on to our shields. Now you can see I am struggling to hit some of these smaller targets because they are going at a fast angular velocity, much faster than my turrets can actually deal with. Plus, they are sort of sitting with, just on that edge of that range there. So here at 48 kilometers, I'm just about taking out that Condor 2. We're going to move on to some of the closer ones. I am going to put on the Weber Fire and the Warp Scrambler. Of course, that is going to be chewing through my capacitor now. I'm going to activate absolutely everything here just to showcase that even with maximum tracking, courtesy of those targeting computers, we're still not able to hit that Condor 2 in the range it's at. So ultimately, I'm going to say flat out, if you're training into large railguns and you want to go for a sniper build, you're probably better off at Tech 9 looking into something like the Naga 2. Obviously, the Naga itself was excellent at sniping. The Naga 2 is just a straight up upgrade over it. And that is something that I will be looking to do a video on very soon. Otherwise, I'm just struggling. I'm struggling because things spawn that little bit too close, and I can't really handle anything getting this close. I'm going to try and send the drones on. I've got I'm jinking here to try and slingshot this interceptor, but ultimately it is proving problematic. With having the Weber Fire and the Scrambler running, that capacitor is really struggling. I can't run, I'm running my shield booster as well to try and keep myself alive. I can't really use the micro warp drive. I'm having to cycle the shield booster on and off as needed. This just, to me, this is not what the Megathron was designed for. It certainly will clear out some of the easier, like the Tech 9 encounters. 100% the news encounters are a little bit easier. Once we get to the storyline missions, though, like Bad Hair Day, Angel or Devil, that kind of thing, this fit really does struggle somewhat, so I would not recommend it if you're going, if this is the kind of fit you enjoy playing, I would not recommend going for those Tech 10 storyline missions. If you want to go for the Tech 10 storyline missions, better to use those large railgun skills on something like a Naga 2. You'll get a much better effect out of it. Anyway, let's jump on to the second fit. Now this, to me, is what the Megathron was born to do. This, of course, is a Captain Benzie special, up-close and personal, snub-nosed railgun brawling build. So we're going to be using the large snub-nosed railguns this time, and again, I'm trying to stay within that meta level 11 as closely as possible, going with Dead Space gear to showcase this at the fullness of its capacity. Now you'll see here we have an optimal range of only 9 kilometers, an accuracy fall off very short and sharp of 13.5 kilometers, meaning we are not getting much range out of this at all. Ultimately, you're looking at about 36 kilometers for maximum range. That's not even the optimal range of the rifled railgun, so yeah. But the DPS is absolutely monstrous on this, 249 per turret. We're getting 1,839.33 DPS out of this, 1,743 of which is straight from the snub-nosed there. Now, in order to facilitate this, again, we have that standard tackle setup, scrambler and weber fire, just in case anything that is getting close, because we need to be fairly close. Anything that's close and has a high angular velocity, we can slow it right the heck down. We have a Nosferatu, which helps us to drain energy out of our opponent's ships and keep our capacitor nice and stable. We are not capacitor stable with it active. We're at 6 minutes 15, but that will fool you slightly, because that doesn't take into consideration the fact that we do have 2 large capacitor batteries here in the bottom, both of which can be activated to give significant boosts to our capacitor, and certainly the capacitor will run quite comfortably at a practically stable rate throughout an encounter. Now, I've still gone for a large micro warp drive here. I know I keep talking about the capacitor capacity here of the Megathron, and then I fit a micro warp drive that takes off 25% of it, but ultimately you kind of need it. If you're using something like an afterburner, you're just not going to be able to get into and out of combat at the speeds required. You know, you can't maintain the ranges that you actually need. We don't care that it's giving a massive signature radius adjustment. Wow, your farm's slightly bigger. They were going to hit you before anyway. We then have 2 adaptive invulnerability fields to help just tank this a little bit more. Yes, you could swap out one of these for a reactive if you're going up against purely Gallente or a Mar, something that is only using lasers or railguns. Then yes, you can swap one of these for a reactive and that will work out better overall. But if you're going up against Minmatar or you're going up against Caldari, anything that has a damage, so like Minmatar cannons obviously do both kinetic, thermal, and explosive damage. That means the reactive is not as good as an adaptive invulnerability field. And if you're going up against Caldari, they also have missiles. Missiles, of course, do all 4 damage types. The reactive is not as good as an adaptive. Finally then, a Pith C-type large shield booster, just again keeps us alive. Otherwise the rigs here are the same, 2 burst aerators and a collision accelerator, 2 targeting system subcontrollers and a semiconductor memory cell. We're looking at very high DPS, although admittedly very short range and does have some issues with tracking, but you'll see how we deal with that in a moment. We get decent enough targeting here, scan resolution of 250mm, that's not too terrible at this point. It still takes a while to lock onto, but it's a darn sight better than like the 120 that we started with. Navigation, again, with very slow, 175.45 meters per second. Obviously, with the micro warp drive active, we do just about push into the 1000 meters per second mark. So it's not, you know, it's not terribly slow at that point. Very slow warp preparation time, though, so if you are moving one of these through nullsec, yeah, scout the route ahead. Anyway, let's jump now out into combat and showcase this fit in action. Now, I actually started off Bad Hair Day Part 2 using this Brawling fit, so I'm going to use the footage that I collected there as I jumped into the encounter for the first time to showcase how this works. Now, I'm trying to lock on here far too early, we're still warping in. God, I hate the fact that you have to wait so long before we can start actually locking onto things, but hey, there we go. So of course, we're going to start with those small targets first of all. Once I'm happy that all the small targets have been locked, we're going to hit the lock all and start to sort of make our approach. Our orbit isn't something we're really worried about here, it is more the approach distance we're looking for. We're not going to move in and start orbiting targets, we are going to try and sit sort of, you know, we're going to sit still and just shoot things as they come to us. We're going to move into the thick of the fight and then blap them. So now that this Condor 2 interceptor here has hit range, you'll see we're going to scram it, we're going to hit it with a Weber fire, the drones are going to start attacking, and those snub-nosed are just going to rip it to pieces. Down it goes there, and we're going to move now on to the Cormorant Covert Ops as it comes up next. At this point in time, we're just basically waiting for the enemy ships to run into our guns. Once we've got these guys killed, we can start approaching towards the ones in the distance, but for now, I'm just going to let them come to me, happy to sit still. That way I reduce the angular velocity. Of course, angular velocity, if I'm moving faster, also increases their angular velocity too, due to how symmetry of angles works. Anyway, we're now looking at ships that are a little bit further away, so I am going to switch off my weapons, because obviously railguns do use capacitor every time they fire. I don't want them firing if they're completely out of range. We are then going to approach here. I'm going to approach the Ferox 2 Guardian and come in here on this mower as it's hitting range. There we go, we're going to activate those snub-nosed, and you see that absolutely monstrous DPS starts ripping those shields to pieces, hit stop on the ship, park up here, put the parking brake on, and just let those turrets do their job. There we go, there goes the mower. Cormorant Covert Ops is going to be next. I'm going to hit approach. Again, approach here I think is set to the 10 km mark. Yeah, it says at the bottom of the screen there, 10 km mark for the approach. It's close enough that as I'm moving in, they're going to be moving towards me. They probably just poke into the 8 km. I then sort of bounce back that little bit of distance. Works quite nicely. But ultimately, I'm just picking out the targets one by one, again, trying to go with size order. Start with the frigates, then the destroyers, then move up to cruisers, battle cruisers, and battleships. There are exceptions to this. If you're being hit with something that has particularly nasty E-war or tackle, for example, take those out first. Keep an eye open for any ships that are here, like if I'm looking down at the overview on the right-hand side there, I can see that the Rokh at 32 km is not locked onto me, nor is the Moa Interdictor. There's no pulsing box around them, which means those are probably logistics ships. I should theoretically be taking those ones out first because they could be healing up their friendly ships. In fact, you can see the blue line on screen there pulsing in the distance just under where the text is, that is showcasing there that Pith Rokh sitting there at 30 km away is currently healing up my target, as is you can actually see the blue line again occasionally pulsing across there just at the top of the screen. That one there is coming in from that Moa Interdictor. I should really be taking those out first just because they're the healers. Always try and take the healers out first, but for the time being, my damage is still more than enough to take this Rokh down quite comfortably. I'm taking very little damage at all, and by cycling my batteries here, you can see that even with the shield booster and both the adaptive invulnerability fields running, and with the snub-nosed railguns, we are barely taking any damage at all to our shields, and our capacitors are still sitting nice and high, currently at 111 obviously. That's because I've got the battery running. But when the battery drops off, I think we're still sitting at about 80% there, which is more than fine. We're about to see that drop now. Let's see what happens. Bye-bye battery. There we are, 77%, 78%, so I was pretty close with 80% guess. And this is kind of how this one does it. Now, I did complete this entire mission here with the with this Megathron, with the Brawling build. Yes, again, of course, once you hit the elites, you start taking a bit of damage. You just have to be good at your target priority, but your DPS is enough to pull down those smaller, faster ships really, really quickly. We rip them out of the sky and move on to the next wave. Ultimately, yes, this can clear Bad Hair Day, and it did so in about 2 hours 15 minutes, including transport time from A to B, jumping from system to system. Might have been about 2:15, 2:20, somewhere around that mark. It was not a long time at all in order to do an encounter like this. So yes, the Megathron can certainly do that. Now, at the start of the video, I asked the question, does the Megathron make a good replacement, therefore, for the Rokh? And ultimately the answer is yes and no, depending on what you want it to do. If you want to use a large railgun sniper, I would probably stick with something like the Naga or the Naga 2. You're still using large railguns, but you're, getting those range bonuses, which creates a much more sniper-themed ship. Here on the Megathron, Brawling is definitely the name of the game. If you like to get up close and personal, if you like to be able to see the enemy's viewports and watch their crews screaming as you blow the ships up, this is the fit for you. The Megathron will do that wonderfully. It is an absolute brute of a ship. Drop onto grid, blow things up, and then sail off laughing. Anyway, folks, that about wraps things up here in regards to the Megathron. I quite enjoy this ship. I love how it looks, but it's still a battleship. It's still not the kind of ship I'm going to spend any serious time flying. I think a lot of you folks are going to enjoy this one. I think it's a really cool ship. Could be a lot of fun for you, especially if Brawling is up your alley. Anyway, don't forget, do check out the giveaway I mentioned at the start of this video. If you are entering that, good luck. I will announce the winners on Monday. Thank you for watching right away to the end on this one, folks. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.